Holy Creator, source of our being, we acknowledge your presence today as we gather together a diverse people who call you by different names and worship you in various ways. Yet, we are created in your image, and we possess that divine spark within us. We ask that you ignite that spark into a flame of passion for learning. Awaken in us the all-consuming thirst for knowledge and wisdom. Open our hearts to recognize and embrace our true calling in life. Give us strength, stamina, and perseverance for whatever lies ahead in the coming weeks, months, and this academic year. Fortify us for success in all our endeavors and as servant leaders. Guide us through the obstacles that arise in our paths and protect us from our own fears and insecurities that prevent us from reaching our full capacity. Bless us, Lord, with an abundance that surpasses all our understanding. For all these things and for the personal prayers we hold in our hearts, we ask in the name of the one to whom we call holy. Amen.
Good morning, Centenary College and honored guests. Welcome especially to the class of 2022. Let's try that again. You get to clap for yourselves as well. Welcome to the class of 2022. Every year we concentrate on one of the great global challenges as we plan speakers and events. This year's theme asks us to consider how to live a meaningful life, one that is not marked simply by the immediate and the selfish, but by the enduring, and by where we fit into the grand story of humankind outside of ourselves. As co-authors of the Centenary story this year, we must hold ourselves and each other to the highest standards of academic and civic integrity. Class of 2022, you added your names to the Honor Code book during orientation. The words of the Honor Code will be ingrained in you as you repeat them for every test and every assignment, along with your classmates here today and generations of Centenary students before you. It is your solemn pledge to uphold a culture of honesty, and I hope that pledge will extend beyond the classroom and well beyond your years as a Centenary student. It is now my great privilege to invite Chief Justice of the Honor Court, Cherie Groninger, forward for the presentation of the Honor Code book.
Meditate on the works He's made, great God, our sovereign Lord. Join us now, the meadow is green, and the waters pure, and the woods serene, and the flowing air is fresh and clean, where God His blessings poured. Feel the wind come down, feel the wind come down, hear it whistle as it goes. A blessing from above. And the sun comes up, and the sun comes up, and the sun comes up, the sun comes up, in witness to His love. Hear now, ye sons of men, for danger lurks in this great garden. The Lord will visit once again to see what we have done. As God is the shepherd and we are the sheep, we our Mother Earth must keep, maintain the air, protect the deep. At Judgment Day He'll come. See the Lord come down. See the Lord come down. See the Lord come down. As we go, remember all His power. See the Lord come down. See the Lord come down. His face is shining bright. You will regret that hour. So now, my people, beware. You're in charge of the seas and the earth and the air. You'd better take extraordinary care of the earth, our only home. All glory be to God on high. Shout praises loudly to the sky. Listen to the earth and hear her cry. And in heaven,
it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today and for whom the President's Convocation is named. Convening our community in this year is the 31st president of Centenary College, Dr. Christopher L. Holloman. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Welcome to Centenary's President's Convocation. I'm so pleased to welcome our class. I feel like I've been welcoming you all for a month and a half, but we'll continue to do so. We are really excited to have you. I want to lift up a few other people I'm particularly pleased to welcome. We have a number of the members of the Centenary College Board of Trustees, including our board chair, David Barlow, with us. We have two, one of whom is on the board and one emeritus board member here from the Brown family whose chapel we sit in, and we appreciate that. We have one of Centenary's legendary faculty members, Professor Emeritus Dr. Lee Morgan, with us, and also my predecessor, Dr. Don Webb, President Emeritus. So let's welcome these distinguished guests. Convocations are the most common academic gathering. They're used for all sorts of things, to kick off new buildings, for graduations. My graduate alma mater calls their commencements convocations, but mostly they're used for this occasion that we meet together to begin a new academic year, to welcome you to a community who has learning as its highest goal and prime value. This is also the last, or perhaps one of the last, official events of orientation. So this event is really aimed at you, the entering class. I hope you've been made to feel welcome. I know Connie and I were able to join you in Paris, and that was a great treat. I hope you've been made to feel welcome back, especially as classes have started, and excited and perhaps not too overwhelmed yet about the year and the years to come at Centenary. Preparing for this talk is always a bit of a challenge for me. I recognize that much of what I have to say to you, how many of you remember very distinctly your high school commencement address? That was only like 3 months ago, right? One or two, that's good. We'll talk later and find out what you remember. Much of what I say today will not stick with you, or perhaps only vaguely. Furthermore, every year, of course, there's a different group of students sitting there. So it's perhaps tempting to recycle a great talk from a previous year, if in fact such a thing exists. I'm not sure about that, but that doesn't seem quite right. That doesn't seem fair. It seems a little like, in fact, I thought I could find one of these. I was pretty sure that in my archives I could find a yellowed piece of legal pad from a lecture I prepared when I first started teaching back well, whenever it was. They seem to have gotten lost in the move. So this is an odd talk in the sense that it's part of a series, but it's part of a series that you'll only hear one of, unless, like our great returning students, mostly in the balcony, hi guys, or the choir, they get to hear this, or the faculty. So it's become now a tradition that we review a little bit. So 2 years ago, in my first year here, I talked about faculty, you were here. Journeying, right. No. I had one person who cheated and called Connie Whittington to find out what my themes were. Last year we talked about vocation and calling, right, excellent. Today I'd like to talk with you a few minutes about another important task for you here in your time at Centenary. But it's one that I don't think we talk about, or we're not as explicit about as we should be, although Dr. Ward is very good at keeping it in front of us and has already alluded to it. I'd like for us to spend a few minutes thinking about storytelling. Storytelling is a huge topic, and there are people sitting across the aisle from you who know much, much more about this topic than I do. So what I hope to do today is to get you thinking, maybe give you a few little tidbits of knowledge that you'll find interesting that might stick with you, and then follow up with one of these experts in this vital task of storytelling. So what is a story? When somebody says, I'm going to tell you a story, what does that bring to mind? Just shout it out. I'm sorry? Telling. Telling. It's an action. It's telling. That's good. Fairy tales. Okay? We're going to come back to that. What else? Story. Plot. Recounting an event, a history, if you will. Experience. Nostalgia. Oh, very good. Community. What else? Climax. Warmth. Warmth, did you say? Morals. Morals. That's a good one. Those are all right. And those are all good aspects of what constitutes a story. There's a narrative, right? There's action. It's structured in some way. It's sorted in a way, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then this question that we're going to come back to right at the very end about truth, fairy tales. Is a story true? Is a story always and in completeness true or not? Somewhere along the line, stories have been set in opposition with facts. We've got facts and we've got stories. And and in our day-to-day work, I see this way too often. As you prepare for standardized tests, as we work on the bullet list to insert into our next PowerPoint, as we develop talking points for our next meeting, we've lost the power and the importance of storytelling. And that's not just sad, it's harmful. It's harmful because it ignores the reality of who we are as human beings. For over 27,000 years since the first cave paintings were discovered, telling stories has been one of our most fundamental communication methods. And I should say, as a good scholar, I'm drawing, as I said, on the work of others, either implicitly or explicitly. If you want to see my sources and sometimes and the exact quotes, please let me know. I'm happy to provide them. There's a science around storytelling. There's brain science around storytelling. And brain psychologists, although we still don't understand a lot about what goes on in the brain, in fact, just on NPR this morning, I heard a story that they are just now identifying a group of brain cells that humans have that mice don't. Well, that's too bad since we use mice for a lot of our brain research. There's something going on there. But if it's actually quite simple, I'm told. If we listen to a PowerPoint presentation with boring bullet points, only a certain part of your brain gets activated. I'm told it's called Broca's area or Wernicke's area. It hits the language part of our brain. We hear the words, we understand the meaning of the words, but that's about it. Contrast that with what happens when we are told a story. Not only are the language parts of our brain activated, but other areas that we would use when we would be experiencing the events of a story. So if somebody tells us how delicious certain foods are, not just the word part of our brain, but the sensory cortex lights up if you do an MRI or whatever the appropriate diagnostic is. If it's a story about motion, our motor cortex fires. A story puts your whole brain to work. So stories are a powerful way for us to learn and to relate to the world. Relate to the world, however, I don't think is a very satisfactory phrase. I suppose one might relate to the world just by letting the world pass you by and let stuff roll over you. Some of us recently, when we were in Paris, saw works by Monet, and Monet's famous for painting series of works of the same thing in different environments, haystacks in every season. I suppose those haystacks are relating to the world in some way, but that's not terribly meaningful. Instead, I want to concentrate on that last word today, and again, Dr. Ward's already foreshadowed it. A major aspect of storytelling is the making of meaning. Human beings are relentless meaning makers. It's hardwired into our DNA in ways that are almost impossible to imagine. Again, some of this is brain research that may still be speculative, but for example, most scientists believe that our eyes actually take in everything that we see. And it's up to the brain to sort out what's important. In fact, I just heard on the radio within the last couple of weeks, this is why those spot the difference games or puzzles, that's why some of those are so hard, because our brains are actually trained not to pay attention to differences that don't matter. So the example I heard, well, if you're a hunter-gatherer hunting on the veldt and you're pursuing your prey, the fact that that bush has lost some leaves since yesterday is irrelevant, and your brain will filter that out. I have personal experience with this. I have had, over the last 10 years or so, fair number of eye issues, one of which caused a huge number of little floaters in your eye, right? Those little specks. And I went to the doctor, went to my ophthalmologist. I said, this isn't working. He said, oh, don't worry about it. In a couple of weeks, your brain will filter those out. They'll still be there, but your brain will learn to ignore them. And he was right, at least for a while. This also happens as we tell the stories of history. As you may or may not know, there are lots of books in the Oz series, apart from The Wizard of Oz, and in one of them we learn that in her castle, Glinda the Good has the Great Book of Records. It's a magical book. And in that book, every single thing that happens in the land of Oz is recorded. Little boy falls down and skins his knee, that gets written. There's an argument between a man and a wife, that gets written. In some respects, it's a perfect history, right? Everything is there. But on the other hand, it's completely useless because there's no sorting, there's no discrimination, there's no filtering what's important and what's not. And that's what we do with our own lives. As we construct our own stories, we choose what to make meaning of and to make meaning with. I found this lovely quote as I was preparing this talk. Throughout the waking day and dreaming night, we stream thoughts unbidden with little care given to completeness and coherency. These are not compositions, these are proto-stories of a life being lived, and they change with retelling to the only audience intended, oneself. We tell the stories of our lives first to ourselves. Who's the star of your story? Hopefully you. How do you self-identify? How do you describe yourself in the story of your life? What about the other players? Just because you're the star doesn't mean the other people are unimportant. How you treat the other people in your story is a key question for us. We talk about, and as Dr. Ward has said, this year we're focusing in particular, we talk a lot about living a life that matters, or to use a different phrase, living a meaningful life. The way we tell the stories of our lives make meaning for us and vice versa. Where we find meaning becomes the content of our stories. There's a whole field of on this called narrative psychology. How we tell our stories. Are you the hero of your story or are you the villain? Is your story about good things happening to you or bad things? Are you the active agent? And again, a theme we talk about a lot here is agency, the right to write. That's, you can figure out the homophone there. The right to write and tell your own story. Helplessness and hopelessness are classic symptoms of depression. Feeling in control is good for mental health. There's a study done of 47 adults undergoing therapy, and they had to write personal narratives over the course of 12 therapy sessions. As these individuals were forced to write their own story, mental health increased. As they learn to be the star of their own story, as they learn to take agency. And that's one of the things we're going to ask you to do. Dean Miller and his staff, we talk about developmental tasks for you in your 4 years. One of those is to learn what it means to be in charge of your life, to have agency. But we have to be mindful that we have to tell our stories to others. There's a New York Times columnist Frank Bruni, and he wrote an essay last weekend in the New York Times about how to get the most out of college. And it was based on a survey that he had done with, and some intensive work with an interesting group of students, some of them actually at his and my alma mater at UNC Chapel Hill. I didn't know he was a Carolina grad till that story. And one of the things he challenged you all to do to make the most out of your time at college, he says, another of those skills frequently overlooked is storytelling. It's different from communication. We talk a lot about as one of our liberal arts goals, effective communication. And he says we need to move beyond that. It's different from communication. It's a next step. Every successful pitch for a new policy, new product, or new company is essentially a story with a shape and logic intended to stir its audience. So is every successful job interview. I'm going to come back to that one. The best moment in a workplace meeting belongs to the colleague who tells the best story. So, he says, take a course in Greek mythology, British literature, political rhetoric, or anything that exposes you to the structure of narrative and the art of persuasion. I want to emphasize to you and suggest that this is a particularly important role for us. Doing what we do in a liberal arts college, stressing the importance of liberal arts education. It's something that the people on this side of the aisle and up here feel passionately about. We know the power and the strength and the value of what we are doing. Not everyone in the wide world does. And it's important for us to have language to talk about that. And it's going to be vitally important for you to tell the story of your education so that it makes sense to employers. Obviously, you need to tell it to make sense to your family, and the wider world, that what you have learned here is valuable, and valuable to society, valued in the workplace. Convince skeptics that you have been trained in skills and values that add up to a coherent, valuable story. I was just reading yesterday, came across my desk an email, the example, a woman, she's a high-ranking executive now with Cisco, the hardware software company. They make routers and all that jazz. And she's high up in their cybersecurity task forces now. She was an English major. She taught English in Japan for a while, came back, and Cisco is trying to make sure that their hardware and software is not overly vulnerable to cybersecurity, and they hired her. Why did they hire her? Well, because the vast majority of cybersecurity leaks aren't about hardware and software. Well, they're about software. They're about human software. They're about human errors and human vulnerabilities. She was able to explain to them, because of her experience living abroad and her training in other cultures, that cultural expectations around privacy are different in different places. And you have to be aware of that as you build in security and so forth. Begin telling your story to yourself. Begin putting the pieces of your coursework together. I assure you that one of the most rewarding times in any one of these faculty members' lives is when a student in class says, oh yeah, we were just talking about that in Dr. Hendricks' English class. That you pull something from one of your other classes, make those connections, and make meaning. All meaning, however, is not created equal. We need to be cautious of making meaning. Human beings, as I've said, are relentless meaning makers. They find meaning even when there may not be meaning there. I know it will come as a great surprise to you, but there are, in fact, no animals represented in the stars. That's a human construction. After Connie and I left you in Paris, we spent a few extra days, and we went out and toured some of the sites at the Battle of the Somme, one of the bloodiest parts of World War I. On July 1st, 2016, the British trying to break the stalemate of trench warfare, bombed the no man's land and the barbed wire relentlessly for hours. They then sent 50,000, more than that, sent over 100,000 men, quote unquote, over the top. 50,000 of those were casualties in one day. The generals had made meaning from the Franco-Prussian War. They had taken the facts of the Franco-Prussian War and decided that the next war was going to be quick and decisive. That's why they mobilized so fast at the beginning of the war. They held on to outdated concepts. And it led to the destruction of an entire generation, especially of French and English on that day, Germans, Russians, other days. I actually was struck by this. I didn't know this was coming, hadn't given it much thought. But in the hymn we just sang, and I encourage you to take it and read. I also encourage you to sing. If you read in your hymnal in front of you, one of Wesley's directions is sing out. May our learning curb the error which unthinking faith can breed, lest we justify some terror with an antiquated creed. May our faith redeem the blunder of believing that our thought has displaced the grounds for wonder which the ancient prophets thought. A week ago yesterday, I was in the glade in France where the World War I armistice was signed. Less than 30 years later, let's see if I can get my math right, maybe less than 20 years later, Adolf Hitler forced the French to sign their surrender on that same train car in the glade in eastern France. He was able to do that because he made meaning. He took the fact that the German people had never seen a foreign soldier on their soil in World War I. How could they possibly have lost the war? They did lose. The German army was completely exhausted. But their country had not been invaded. Hitler was able to take that fact and some other facts about hyperinflation and blah, 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 and he was able to combine them into a narrative that he used to justify unspeakable crimes against humanity. This dance between story and truth is complex. The concept of truth, obviously it's something that's being dealt with in a very clumsy and simple-minded way now, but it's not an insignificant question. And we need to wrestle with that. When we step away from quote-unquote truth, why are we doing it? Are we doing it because the facts are so many that we have to choose some sorting mechanism, what's important and what's not? Or are we stepping away from truth to deceive? Some of you will hear me when I get a chance to talk to the Trek classes in a few weeks. Thanks for the invitation, Dr. Hammond. I'm going to be talking very briefly about maps. And I usually use the phrase, all maps are lies. Well, all maps are distortions. It's simply impossible to depict three-dimensional reality on a two-dimensional plane of a map without distorting something. Is that a harmful distortion? Not if you know about it and you can take account of it. Now, if you try and navigate Greenland by your basic Mercator projection that makes Greenland look the same size as Africa, you're going to have trouble. Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, has a very famous essay where he argues that if you're building an economics model, your assumptions, your behavioral assumptions, whether they're true or not, doesn't matter at all. What matters is, does your model generate good predictions? So why are we stepping away from truth, quote unquote? We need to be conscious of why. There's a book that Dr. Demarath and I have both come to admire. I brought my copy with me. It's called Maps of Time. And it was an opening book. It's old now because I had it when I was still in the faculty. 2005. Well, that's the first paperback printing. So but roughly that, and it was the opening volume in a movement called Big History. Some of you may have encountered it in high school. The Gates Foundation has put a lot of money behind Big History as a concept. And it tells the story of our universe from the Big Bang to today as a creation myth. Myths are sometimes true. I want to read a short, relatively short passage. The first part goes out to the students. The second part may be addressed more appropriately to faculty. Our author, David Christensen, is anticipating some of the objections to this way of telling history. Nevertheless, it is a mistake for historians to shun these large narratives, however grand they may seem. Like it or not, people will look for and find large stories because they can provide a sense of meaning. As William Cronin has written of environmental history, when we describe human activities within an ecosystem, we always seem to tell stories about them. Like all historians, we configure the events of the past into causal sequences, stories that order and simplify these events to give them new meanings. We do so because narrative is the chief literary form that tries to find meaning in an overwhelmingly crowded and disordered chronological reality. And here we talk to the faculty. If paid intellectuals are too finicky to shape these stories, they will flourish all the same, but the intellectuals will be ignored and will eventually disenfranchise themselves. This is an abdication of responsibility, particularly as intellectuals have played such a crucial role in creating many of today's meta-narratives. Tell your story. Make meaning of your lives. I want to close with one of the most interesting figures that I'm aware of. Some of you will know him. He lived in France mostly at the end of the 30 Years' War, which I'm sure you all remember was in the early part of the 1600s. He was very poor. He had joined the army to get 3 meals and a place to sleep. When the war was over, he took a series of petty jobs and eventually went to work at a priory, at a monastery. He applied to the prior, to the abbot, and was told that he was essentially illiterate and therefore he could not become a monk, but he was welcome to spend his time working for the monks. His name is Brother Lawrence. He spent the next 55 years washing the monks' dishes, and then, as he was unable to stand for that long, repairing their sandals. Even during his lifetime, he became a great source of wisdom. Visiting clergy would ask, "Can I go down and talk with Brother Lawrence for a while?" Brother Lawrence realized that for him, the meaning of his life was not the washing of the dishes or the mending of sandals. It was the way that he was able, for him, meaning came from being in relationship, being in discussion with God. And he writes quite movingly that he could pray just as well while washing the dishes while people were shouting around him as he could anywhere else. And in fact, his book, a collection of his sayings, Practicing the Presence of God, is still in print 300 years later. Brother Lawrence found meaning and was able to tell his story of finding meaning in what most of us would consider drudgery in a way that was so powerful that people literally came from miles around to hear him tell it. So how will you tell your story? How will you take the experiences of the next 4 years and fit them together? Don't wait. Don't wait till the night before commencement and think back, I wonder how this all fits together. Start making your meaning now. Write your story. Every night. How did what today? Wow, let's try that one more time. How did what I learned today fit into what I thought? Or how did it not? And how am I going to reconcile those things? Somebody said recently, I read recently, I don't know how long ago they said it, your lives, the story of your lives are written in chalk, not ink. You can find a different narrative. You know, this is my last point, I suppose. You're all familiar with you'll hopefully in your 4 years here, if you haven't already, you'll read at least a little bit of Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he talks about how progress is made in science. And probably the most famous example of that is the transition from the Ptolemaic view of the universe or the solar system to the Copernican, where we went from what was blindingly obvious that the sun went around the Earth. We could see that. The data supported it. Well, except once we could see the planets, they go backwards every once in a while, so that doesn't fit. So do we change our model? No, we stick another wheel on the outside of the wheel of our solar system. And gradually, as our observations get better and better, do our models change? No, the models just get more complicated and complicated until you have these wheels within wheels within wheels. And there's this, I don't know if you saw one at the Science Museum in France, but there are these things called orreries, which are these circular models of the solar system. And it becomes what one author called an orrery of errors. It's a self-reinforcing mistake until finally the mistakes are so overwhelming that the model falls apart. You may come to a point where you realize that the story of your life needs to be erased and start again. That's okay. That's part of the luxury you have in these 4 years. How will your story, as Dr. Ward's already foreshadowed, how will your story become a part of Centenary's? How will all the rest of us play in your story? How will we be in your story? How will you be in ours? And perhaps most fundamentally, how will your story fit into and change the story of society? That's my hope for you. That we give you the chance to explore your story, to write your story, to fit it in with our stories and create something uniquely new. We are excited to have you here. We're excited to hear your stories. Thank you. Wait. As I was getting ready to say, before the alma mater and the benediction, as you leave today, you will be presented with a challenge coin commemorating your membership in the class of 2022. Challenge coins have an interesting history, although I think a lot of it's completely made up, but again, some of the best stories are. They certainly originated in the military and really became popular after World War II. Now you get them all the time. I've gotten 2 or 3 at different events. They're used to denote, at its most basic level, denote membership in a group. And in the military, if you're not carrying your challenge coin when they start a coin challenge and start tapping on the bar with the challenge coin, you have to buy the next round of drinks. Or if somebody taps the challenge coin and you have yours, they have to buy your drink. So that is not a Centenary tradition, let me be clear on that. No, your Centenary challenge coin, you can't get your diploma until you turn your check. No, I'm just making that up. The meaning of your challenge coin is what you make of it. But I know that on the day before commencement, you're going to come to see Mrs. Whittington or somebody else and say, you know, I remember I got my challenge coin and I did something with it because I didn't really care about it then. I'd sure like to have one now. Fortunately, we usually have a little extra store. But anyway, that's why we give them out, is as a physical reminder, physical signifier of your membership in this unique class, the class of 22. So that's why you're getting them. And now, please join and rise for the alma mater, the benediction. Stay in your place for the academic procession. Thank you.